a cowboy discovered a mail-order bride with a bruised face and a note. The town of Red Hollow was small, quiet, and surrounded by miles of open land. Dusty roads stretched between wooden buildings, and the wind often carried the smell of dry grass and horses. Life there was simple. People woke up early, worked hard, and went to bed soon after the sun disappeared behind the hills. It was not a place full of excitement, but it was a place where honest people tried their best to build steady lives. Samuel Turner had lived in Red Hollow almost all his life. He was known as a hard-working cowboy who kept mostly to himself. He owned a modest ranch just outside town. It was not the biggest ranch, nor the richest, but it was the result of years of effort. Every fence post had been placed by his hands. Every stable board had been nailed in with patience. He had built everything slowly, piece by piece. Samuel had lost his parents when he was young. Since then, he had learned not to depend on anyone. He woke before sunrise each day, fed the horses, checked the cattle, repaired whatever needed fixing, and worked until his muscles ached. The routine kept him busy, but it did not quiet the loneliness that followed him like a shadow. Evenings were the hardest. After a long day, he would sit at his small wooden table with a simple meal in front of him. The house felt too quiet. No laughter, no conversation, just the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Sometimes he would catch himself listening for a sound that never came. His friend Daniel, who owned the general store in town, often told him, "A man can't talk to horses forever, Sam. You need someone in that house." Samuel would just smile and shake his head. He was not a man of many words, but deep inside he knew Daniel was right. After many months of thinking, Samuel made a decision that felt both hopeful and uncertain. He wrote to a mail-order bride service in the city. He had heard about it from other ranchers. I would not about romance or big dreams. It was about companionship, about two people agreeing to build a life together. In his letter, Samuel was honest. He wrote that he was not wealthy. He wrote that ranch life was difficult and required strength. But he also wrote that he valued kindness, respect, and loyalty above all else. He promised that any woman who came to his ranch would be treated with fairness. Weeks passed. Then, one day, a reply arrived. Her name was Claire Whitmore. Her letter was short but polite. She explained that she had grown up in a small town. Her parents had passed away several years earlier, and she had been living under the care of a distant guardian. She did not share many details, but she wrote that she wanted a fresh start. She wanted a peaceful life, far from crowded streets and painful memories. Something about her words felt sincere. There was no demand, no complaint, no fancy description. Just quiet hope. After exchanging a few more letters, they agreed she would travel to Red Hollow. Samuel prepared as best as he could. He cleaned the house from top to bottom. He repaired the guest room door that had been sticking for months. He even bought a small bouquet of wildflowers from a nearby field and placed them in a jar on the table. On the morning the train was scheduled to arrive, Samuel woke earlier than usual. He put on his cleanest shirt and brushed the dust from his boots. His hands felt strangely restless. He had faced storms, runaway cattle, and broken fences without fear. But waiting for that train made his heart beat faster than any of those things. The town gathered near the small train station, as they always did when a train arrived. It was one of the few events that brought excitement. Children ran near the tracks while their parents called them back. The loud whistle echoed across the land as the train approached, sending up a cloud of smoke. Samuel stood quietly, hat in hand. When the train finally stopped, passengers began stepping down one by one. Businessmen with briefcases, families with children, travelers carrying heavy bags. Then he saw her. She stepped down slowly, holding a small brown suitcase in both hands. She wore a simple blue dress and a light bonnet. She was thinner than he expected, and her movements were careful, almost cautious. Her eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for something, or perhaps fearing it. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked gently. She looked up at him. For a brief second their eyes met. Hers were light gray, but they carried a sadness that felt older than her years. "Yes," she answered softly. It was then that Samuel noticed it. Just beneath the edge of her bonnet, partly hidden by a loose strand of hair, was a dark bruise on her cheek. His stomach tightened. He did not stare, but he could not ignore it either. It was not something easily explained by a simple accident. "Welcome to Red Hollow," he said calmly, offering to carry her suitcase. She hesitated before letting go of it, as if she was not used to others helping her. "Thank you," she whispered. The townspeople watched with quiet curiosity. Some smiled kindly, others exchanged curious glances. A mail-order bride was not common, but it was not unheard of either. As they walked toward the wagon, Samuel noticed how Clara kept her shoulders slightly hunched, as though expecting someone to call her back. When a loud noise from the train engine echoed behind them, she flinched. Samuel pretended not to notice. He did not want to embarrass her. The wagon ride back to the ranch was quiet. The wheels rolled over dry dirt, and the horses moved steadily forward. The land stretched wide around them, golden under the afternoon sun. Samuel tried to begin a conversation. "The ranch is about 20 minutes from town," he said. "It's peaceful out there. Not much noise except the wind." "That sounds nice," Clara replied, her voice barely louder than the breeze. He glanced at her briefly. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. The bruise was clearer now in the sunlight. It was recent. "If you're tired from the journey, you can rest when we arrive," he added. Silence returned. Samuel's mind filled with questions, but he chose patience instead. He had learned long ago that people spoke more freely when they felt safe. When the ranch finally came into view, Clara looked up properly for the first time. The small wooden house stood near a large oak tree. A barn rested a short distance away. Horses grazed in the field. "It's not much," Samuel said modestly. Clara studied it carefully. For a moment, something changed in her expression. It was not fear. It was something softer. Maybe relief. Samuel felt a small warmth in his chest. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her suitcase inside. The house smelled of clean wood and fresh air. The wildflowers on the table added a touch of color. Clara noticed them immediately. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I thought the house could use some brightness," he replied simply. She gave a small, careful smile. But even as she looked around, Samuel noticed she kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting someone to appear outside. Something was not right. He did not know her full story yet. He did not know where that bruise came from, or why fear seemed to follow her steps. But one thing was clear to him as he watched her stand quietly in the middle of his home. This woman had not come to Red Hollow only for marriage. She had come to escape something. And whatever it was, it had left its mark. Samuel removed his hat and placed it gently on the table. He made a silent promise to himself in that moment. No matter what shadows followed her here, she would not face them alone. Outside, the wind moved softly through the tall grass. The ranch, once filled with silence, now held a new presence. And though neither of them knew what the coming days would bring, one thing had already changed. Samuel's lonely house no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of something important. Clara stayed inside the small guest room Samuel had prepared for her. He had placed clean sheets on the bed and set a small lamp near the window. The wildflowers on the table in the main room added a gentle touch, but the house still felt unfamiliar to her. Every sound seemed louder than it truly was. The wind brushing against the walls, the soft steps of horses outside, the creak of wood settling in the cool night air. Samuel did not disturb her. He prepared a simple supper of bread, beans, and tea. When he knocked gently on her door to let her know the meal was ready, she opened it slowly, as if unsure of what to expect. They sat across from each other at the wooden table. The lantern light flickered softly between them. Samuel tried to keep the conversation easy. He spoke about the ranch, about the nearest town, about how the seasons changed the color of the hills. Clara listened carefully and answered when he asked something directly, but she never spoke more than necessary. Her eyes often lowered to her plate. The bruise on her cheek looked darker in the warm light. Samuel noticed it again, but he did not ask. He believed questions should come at the right time. After supper, Clara thanked him politely and returned to her room. Samuel stayed at the table longer than usual. Something about the quiet felt different now. The house was no longer empty, yet there was still a wall between them. Later that night, as Samuel prepared to sleep in his own small room down the hall, he heard a sudden sound. It was not loud, but it was sharp enough to catch his attention. It sounded like something falling. He stepped into the hallway and paused. The sound had come from Clara's room. He knocked lightly. "Miss Clara, are you all right?" There was a brief silence before her soft voice answered, "Yes, I'm fine." Samuel hesitated, but decided not to push further. "If you need anything, just call," he said gently. He returned to his room, but sleep did not come easily. His thoughts were filled with questions. The next morning, Samuel woke before sunrise as usual. He stepped outside to begin his chores. The sky was painted with soft pink and orange colors. The air felt cool and fresh. As he worked, he found himself glancing toward the house more often than usual. He wondered if Clara was resting well or if she was lying awake, still carrying worries he did not understand. When he returned inside after feeding the horses, he noticed something near the doorway of the guest room. A folded piece of paper lay on the wooden floor. It must have slipped from Clara's suitcase when she unpacked. He did not want to invade her privacy. He believed strongly in respect. But something about the way she had reacted the night before and the bruise on her face made him uneasy. The paper looked old and slightly wrinkled, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. He picked it up slowly. For a second he considered placing it back without looking at it, but then he remembered the fear in her eyes at the train station. He unfolded the note. The words were short and written in firm handwriting. "She does not belong to you. Send her back. If you keep her, there will be consequences." Samuel read the lines twice. A cold feeling ran through him. The message was clear. It was not friendly. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a warning. He folded the paper carefully and held it in his hand. His jaw tightened slightly, but his face remained calm. Clara stepped out of her room just then. When she saw the note in his hand, her face turned pale. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. "Is that?" she began softly. "It fell near your door," Samuel replied in a steady voice. "I did not mean to pry." She looked at it as if she already knew what it said. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You have nothing to apologize for," Samuel said quietly. "But I need to understand." She lowered herself into a chair at the table. The morning sunlight entered through the window, but it did little to brighten her expression. For several seconds, she remained silent. Samuel did not interrupt. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, keeping his posture relaxed so she would not feel pressured. Finally, Clara spoke. "My parents passed away 3 years ago," she began. "After that, I had no close family left. A distant guardian took responsibility for me. At first, I thought he meant well." Her voice was soft but steady enough to continue. "He managed the small inheritance my parents left. He made decisions about where I would live and who I would meet. I did not question him at first. I was grieving. I did not know how to stand on my own." Samuel listened carefully, his hands resting calmly on the table. "But over time," Clara continued, "I realized that his care came with control. He decided everything. If I disagreed, he became angry. If I spoke of wanting to leave, he would remind me that I had nowhere else to go." Her fingers tightened around the note. "When I found out about the mail order service, I saw it as a chance to start again, somewhere far enough that I could breathe." Samuel understood more now. "And the bruise?" he asked gently, his voice careful and calm. Clara looked down. "The night before I left, we argued. He did not want me to go. He said I was making a mistake. He said I owed him obedience." She paused as if choosing her next words carefully. "He grabbed my arm too tightly. I tried to pull away. In the struggle, I fell against the table. That's how this happened." Samuel felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his expression controlled. He did not want to frighten her further. "Why would he send this note?" he asked. "He believes I belong under his authority," Clara replied. "He does not see me as someone who can choose her own life." The room fell quiet again. Samuel stood and walked toward the window. He looked out at the wide fields. The land felt open and free, yet trouble had already followed her here. "You are not property," he said firmly, though his tone remained gentle. "You are here because you chose to be." Perhaps she was not used to hearing such words. "I do not want to bring danger to your home," she said quickly. "If you wish, I can return to town. I can find work somewhere else." "No," he said simply. The word was not loud, but it carried strength. "You came here for a new beginning. This ranch is your home now, if you wish it to be. I will not send you away because of someone else's threats." Clara's eyes filled with emotion, but she blinked it back. "You barely know me," she said. "I know enough," Samuel replied. "I know fear when I see it, and I know it should not follow someone into their future." Ugh. For the first time since arriving, Clara allowed herself to breathe deeply. The tension in her shoulders eased just slightly. Samuel placed the note on the table between them. "We will keep this," he said. "Not as a warning, but as proof that you left something behind, and that it cannot control you anymore." Outside, the sun had risen higher, filling the ranch with light. The day's work waited, as it always did, but something had shifted inside the house. The truth was no longer hidden. Samuel knew now that Clara's arrival was not simple. She had not come only as a bride. She had come seeking safety, respect, and the right to decide her own path. And Samuel understood that whatever came next, it would test more than just his strength as a rancher. It would test his courage as a man willing to stand beside her. As the morning continued, Clara helped prepare breakfast. The silence between them felt different now, not heavy, but thoughtful. The note lay folded on the table, a small piece of paper, but it carried the weight of the past. The days after the note was found did not return to normal. On the outside, life at the ranch continued the same way it always had. The sun rose early. The horses needed feeding. The fences needed checking. Dust still drifted across the open land. But inside the house, something had changed. There was a quiet awareness between Samuel and Clara, as if both of them knew that the past had not fully let go. Clara tried her best to adjust to ranch life. She woke early, sometimes even before Samuel. At first she did not know how to help, but she watched carefully. She learned how to prepare simple meals using what they had. She swept the floors, washed clothes by hand, and even began tending the small patch of soil near the side of the house. "I thought we could plant vegetables here," she said one morning, kneeling in the dirt with rolled-up sleeves. "It might make the place feel more alive." Samuel stood nearby, leaning lightly against the fence. For the first time since she arrived, he noticed a small spark in her expression. "I think that's a fine idea," he replied. He brought her extra tools and showed her where the soil was softer. Clara listened closely, asking careful questions. With each passing day, she seemed less afraid of the open land around her, but there were still moments when fear returned without warning. One afternoon, while Samuel was repairing part of the barn, Clara was hanging freshly washed clothes outside. The wind was stronger than usual, making the fabric snap sharply in the air. Suddenly, a distant sound of horse hooves echoed from the road beyond the hill. Clara froze. The cloth slipped from her hands and fell into the dust. Her breathing grew shallow. For a moment she could not move. Samuel noticed immediately. He dropped his tools and walked toward her. "It's just a traveler passing through," he said calmly, after glancing toward the road. A single rider was moving steadily along, not slowing down. Clara nodded, but her hands were still shaking. "You're safe here," Samuel reminded her gently. She forced a small smile, but her eyes told him that the fear was still close beneath the surface. Later that week, Samuel rode into town to pick up supplies. Clara insisted she would be fine alone for a few hours. He hesitated but agreed, promising to return before sunset. Red Hollow was its usual self when he arrived. A few men stood outside the general store talking about crops and weather. Children chased each other near the water pump. It looked peaceful. But as Samuel tied his horse and stepped inside the store, Daniel gave him a look that was different from his usual friendly greeting. "Sam," Daniel said quietly, leaning across the counter. "A stranger came through this morning." Samuel's body stiffened slightly. "What kind of stranger?" "Dark coat. Asked questions." "What kind of questions?" "About you. About your ranch. And about a young woman who recently arrived by train." The words settled heavily in the air. Samuel kept his voice steady. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing important," Daniel replied quickly. "Just that folks come and go. I didn't mention where you live." But he didn't seem like a man just passing through. Samuel thanked him and gathered his supplies, but his mind was no longer on flour or tools. It was on Clara. The warning in the note had not been empty. He rode back faster than usual, the wind brushing sharply against his face. As the ranch came into view, he felt a wave of relief when he saw Clara sitting outside near her small garden patch. She looked up as he approached, sensing something in his posture. "What happened?" she asked softly. Samuel dismounted and walked toward her. He did not want to alarm her, but he would not hide the truth either. "A man came to town asking about you," he said calmly. Clara's face lost color. "I told you," she whispered. "He wouldn't let me go." Samuel crouched slightly so they were at eye level. "No one can force you to return. You made your choice." "But he believes I belong under his authority," she replied, her voice trembling. "He thinks I owe him everything." "You owe no one your freedom," Samuel answered firmly. Clara looked away, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. "If he comes here, I don't want you to suffer because of me." "You are not a burden," he said, "and I am not afraid of a man who thinks control makes him strong." The rest of the day passed with quiet tension. Samuel kept watch more carefully than usual. Every sound carried meaning. Every shadow felt sharper. As evening approached, a figure appeared on the distant road. One rider, moving slowly toward the ranch. Clara saw him at the same moment Samuel did. Her breath caught. "That's him," she whispered. Samuel placed himself slightly in front of her, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady protective stance. The rider stopped several yards away from the house. He did not dismount immediately. He studied the ranch, the barn, the fence, measuring everything with his eyes. Finally, he stepped down. He was older than Samuel expected. His posture was rigid, his expression hard. He walked forward with confidence, as if he had every right to be there. "Clara," he called out evenly, "it's time to come home." Clara's hands trembled, but she did not step forward. Samuel spoke instead. "She is home." The man's eyes shifted to Samuel. "This matter does not concern you." "It does," Samuel replied calmly. "She is under my protection." The man's jaw tightened. "She belongs under my care. I have legal authority." Clara swallowed hard. Her heart pounded, but something inside her was changing. For days, Samuel had treated her as an equal, not as property, not as someone to command, but as someone with choice. Slowly, she stepped out from behind Samuel. "I do not belong to anyone," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I chose to leave." The man's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake." "No," she replied, finding strength in her words. "I am correcting one." The wind blew between them, lifting dust from the ground. The moment felt long and heavy. Samuel did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply stood firm. "You have no claim here," he said evenly. "If you continue to disturb this property, the town will hear of it." The man looked between them, realizing he no longer held the same power over Clara that he once had. She was not the silent, frightened girl who had boarded the train. Fear was still present, but it was no longer controlling her. After a tense silence, the man turned back toward his horse. "This is not finished," he said coldly. But as he rode away, his words sounded less certain. Clara's knees felt weak. Samuel gently guided her to sit down on the porch steps. "You did well," he said quietly. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear this time, but from release. "I've never spoken to him like that before," she admitted. Samuel gave a small nod. "Sometimes courage grows when someone believes in you." The threat had not completely disappeared, but something important had happened. Clara had faced her past directly. She had spoken her truth, and Samuel had proven that his promise was not just words. The trouble that followed her had reached their doorstep. But instead of running, they had stood together. Under the wide western sky, as the stars slowly appeared one by one, Clara realized something she had not felt in years. For the first time, she was not facing fear alone. The morning after the man rode away did not feel peaceful. Even though the sun rose gently over the hills and the sky looked clear and calm, there was a quiet tension in the air around the ranch. Samuel woke earlier than usual. He stepped outside and stood still for a long moment, listening. The land was silent except for the soft sounds of cattle moving in the distance. But Samuel knew that silence did not always mean safety. The man's final words still echoed in his mind. "This is not finished." Inside the house, Clara had not slept well. She had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the courage she had shown the evening before. A part of her felt proud. Another part felt afraid of what might happen next. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw Samuel already preparing coffee. He looked tired but steady. "You should have woken me," she said softly. "You needed rest," he replied. "Today may require strength." As they sat at the table, there was no need to repeat what they were both thinking. The man would not give up easily. He had lived his life believing he had authority over her. Losing control would not sit quietly with him. "I don't want this to become bigger than it already is," Clara said carefully. "I don't want the town involved because of me." Samuel looked at her firmly but kindly. "You are not causing trouble, he is. And people should know the truth." For years, she had been taught to stay quiet to avoid problems. Speaking up still felt unfamiliar. Later that morning, Samuel rode into town again. This time, he did not go only for supplies. He went to speak with the town sheriff, a middle-aged man named Mr. Carter who had known Samuel since childhood. The sheriff listened closely as Samuel explained everything. The note, the warning, the visit to the ranch. Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Does he have any legal claim over her?" he asked. "Not that I'm aware of," Samuel answered. "She is of age. She chose to leave." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then he has no right to force her anywhere. If he returns and causes disturbance, I'll handle it." Samuel felt some relief hearing those words. Meanwhile, Clara decided she would not hide inside the house. She stepped outside and continued working on her small garden. Her hands moved through the soil, steady and focused. She reminded herself that fear would not decide her future anymore. As noon approached, she noticed movement on the road again. Her heart skipped. Another rider. This time, however, she saw something different. The rider was not alone. 2 other men followed behind him. They were not rushing, but they were not passing through either. Clara stood up slowly. Samuel was still in town. For a moment, old fear tried to take over her thoughts. Her first instinct was to run inside and lock the door, but then she remembered the night before. She remembered her own voice saying, "I do not belong to anyone." She stayed where she was. The rider stopped a short distance from the ranch house. The same man stepped forward. His expression was colder than before. "You are being stubborn," he called out. "You do not understand the consequences." Clara swallowed but did not step back. "I understand enough," she replied. "You were placed under my care," he continued. "You cannot simply walk away." "I can," she answered, her voice shaking slightly but clear. The 2 men behind him remained silent, watching. Just then, another sound approached from behind. Horse hooves. Samuel returned, riding quickly toward the ranch. Behind him were Sheriff Carter and Daniel from the general store. Samuel had not taken chances. The man on the road noticed them and stiffened. The sheriff rode forward first. "Is there a problem here?" he asked in a calm but firm tone. "I have come to take back someone under my authority." The sheriff glanced at Clara. "Miss, are you here against your will?" This was the moment that mattered most. She stepped forward so her voice would carry clearly. "No," she said. "I am here by my own choice. I left willingly. I do not wish to return." The sheriff nodded once. Then he looked at the man. "You heard her. She is not under your control. If you continue to press this matter, it will be considered harassment." The words settled heavily in the air. The man's face flushed with anger, but he understood the position he was in. He was no longer dealing with a frightened young woman alone. He was facing witnesses, law, and a town that valued fairness. "You are making a mistake," he said again, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "No," Clara replied quietly but firmly. "I am choosing my own life." For several long seconds, no one moved. Finally, the man turned sharply, mounted his horse, and signaled for the others to follow. They rode away without another word. This time, his departure felt different. It did not feel like a threat hanging in the air. It felt like an ending. The sheriff watched until the riders disappeared beyond the hill. Then he turned to Clara. "If he returns again, you inform me immediately," he said. "But I doubt he will. He knows he has no standing here." "Thank you," Clara said sincerely. Daniel gave her a supportive nod before heading back toward town. When they were alone again, the ranch seemed brighter somehow. The sky looked wider. The wind felt lighter. Clara's legs trembled slightly, and she sat down on the porch steps. Samuel joined her. "You were brave," he said softly. She let out a long breath. "I was terrified." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Samuel replied. "It is standing firm despite it." Clara looked at him, and for the first time since she arrived, her smile reached her eyes. "I don't feel owned anymore," she said quietly. "I feel free." The bruise on her cheek had nearly faded by now, leaving only a faint shadow. But the deeper mark, the fear she had carried inside, was beginning to heal too. That evening, the town seemed warmer when they rode in for supper at the small cafe. People greeted Clara kindly. Word had spread, but not in a harmful way. Instead, the townspeople saw her as someone who had chosen independence. No one whispered, no one judged. They simply welcomed her. As the sun set over Red Hollow, casting golden light across the hills, Clara stood outside the ranch house and looked at the land stretching before her. A few weeks ago, she had stepped off a train uncertain, frightened, carrying a bruise and a warning. Now, she stood strong, having faced the very person who once controlled her. Samuel joined her at her side. "It's quiet," she said. "Yes," he replied, but this time the quiet did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. The confrontation that once seemed like a storm had passed, and in its place remained something stronger than fear. Choice. Respecting the beginning of a life built not on control, but on partnership. After the riders disappeared beyond the hills, life at the ranch slowly returned to a steady rhythm. But this time it felt different. The air seemed lighter. The house no longer carried the heavy silence that once filled every corner. Instead, there was movement, conversation, and the quiet comfort of two people learning how to build something together. Clara woke the next morning with a strange feeling in her chest. For years, she had lived with tension resting in her shoulders. Even on calm days, she had always expected someone to correct her, command her or remind her of her place. But now, as sunlight streamed gently through the window of her room, she realized something had changed. She was not waiting for orders. Gee. She was choosing her day. She stepped outside and found Samuel repairing a fence post near the barn. He looked up when he saw her and gave a small nod. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, and her voice carried a softness that came from peace rather than fear. She joined him, holding the nails steady while he worked. It was a simple task, but it felt meaningful. They were not standing on opposite sides anymore. They were working side by side. As days turned into weeks, Clara grew stronger in ways she had never expected. Her small garden began to show signs of life. Green shoots pushed through the soil, reaching toward the sun. She spent hours tending to them, brushing dirt from her hands with a satisfied smile. Samuel noticed how carefully she cared for each plant. "You treat them like they're important," he said once. "They are," she replied. "They remind me that growth takes time." Soon there was no visible mark left behind. But more important than that, the fear inside her slowly loosened its grip. She no longer jumped at every distant sound. She no longer checked the road every few minutes. Trust began to replace worry. The town also welcomed her warmly. Clara started visiting the general store on her own. At first, she felt nervous walking through the streets without Samuel beside her, but each visit made her more confident. Mrs. Adam Harper, who ran the small cafe, often asked Clara to sit and talk while she prepared tea. They spoke about recipes, about seasons, and about simple hopes for the future. Clara realized she had never truly had friends before. Conversations without pressure felt new and comforting. One afternoon, while returning from town, Clara paused near the hill overlooking the ranch. The land stretched wide and golden under the afternoon sun. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to fully feel the moment. She had arrived in Red Hollow with fear in her eyes and uncertainty in her heart. Now she felt rooted. When she reached the house, she found Samuel sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked as she sat beside him. He considered the question for a moment. "I used to think I had everything under control," he said. "The land, the work, the routine. But I was just surviving, not living." She understood what he meant. "I was surviving too," she admitted. They sat in comfortable silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because silence between them no longer felt heavy. Over time, their marriage shifted naturally from arrangement to partnership. They learned each other's habits and preferences. Samuel discovered that Clara enjoyed reading in the evenings, so he began bringing books from town when possible. Clara noticed how tired Samuel's shoulders looked after long days, so she made sure supper was warm and ready when he returned. These small acts of care built something stronger than grand promises. One evening, as they shared a meal, Samuel cleared his throat slightly. "I never asked you something important," he said. She looked at him curiously. "Are you happy here?" The question was simple but sincere. Clara set down her fork and thought carefully before answering. "Happiness used to feel like something far away," she said, "like something meant for other people. But here, I feel steady. I feel respected. And that feels like the beginning of happiness." Samuel gave a small smile. "That's enough for me," he said. Seasons began to change. Summer warmth slowly gave way to cooler winds. The fields shifted from golden to soft brown. Clara learned how to prepare for winter, storing vegetables and helping organize supplies. She was no longer a guest. She was part of the ranch. Sometimes children from town would visit to see the horses. Clara found herself laughing freely as she showed them how to feed the animals carefully. The sound of her laughter carried across the open land, bright and unguarded. Samuel often paused during his work just to listen to that sound. One night, months after the confrontation, Clara brought out the folded note that had once caused so much fear. She had kept it tucked away in a drawer. She placed it on the table. "I kept this to remind myself of where I came from," she said. Samuel looked at it quietly. "Do you still need it?" he asked. Clara studied the paper for a long moment. The words no longer made her heart race. They no longer held power. Slowly she shook her head. Together they walked outside. Under the wide sky filled with stars, Clara tore the note into small pieces. The wind carried them away into the darkness. It was not done out of anger. It was done out of freedom. As winter arrived, the ranch house felt warmer than ever. A small fire crackled in the fireplace. Snow dusted the land outside, turning everything quiet and white. Samuel placed another log into the fire and looked across the room at Clara, who was mending a shirt near the lamp. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "people might say I rescued you. They would be wrong. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "We rescued each other," she continued. "You gave me safety, and I gave you company." Samuel nodded slowly. It was true. Before Clara arrived, his life had been steady but empty. He had built a ranch, but he had not built a home. Clara had brought warmth into the rooms, conversation into the evenings, and purpose into the quiet spaces. And Samuel had given her something she had never fully experienced before, respect without condition. Years later, the story of how Clara arrived in Red Hollow would still be remembered. Some would recall the tension of that day when riders came to the ranch. Others would remember how firmly she spoke when asked if she wished to return, but the part that mattered most was not the conflict. It was what came after. On a calm spring morning, Clara stood once again near her garden, now larger and full of bright flowers. Samuel approached her, brushing dust from his hands. "The crops look strong this year," he said. "So do we," she replied with a light laugh. He slipped his hand gently into hers. The gesture was simple, but it carried years of trust. The land around them stretched wide and open, just as it had the day she first arrived. But this time, there was no fear hiding behind her eyes. Only confidence. Only peace. The lonely cowboy who once ate supper in silence now shared stories by the fire. The frightened bride who once stepped off a train with a bruise and a warning now stood tall, unafraid of the road behind her. Their life was not filled with grand adventures or dramatic changes. It was built on daily effort, shared respect, and quiet strength. And under the endless western sky, they found what both had been searching for all along. Not rescue, not control, but partnership.